Hello, everyone. Welcome back to class. So we have made it to chapter 14. And in this chapter, we're talking about two body systems, our circulatory system and our respiratory system, which together allow us to get oxygen to all of our bodies so our body cells can survive. So this little critter here is an axolotl. They've kind of become popular in pop culture in the last few years, so you may have heard of these before. This is a kind of salamander that lives in central Mexico. And these little fringes that it has here, these aren't just decorations, these are actually gills. Gills, especially external gills, are rare in amphibians as adults, or in any animal as an adult. It's rare to see external gills. But they're very important to the axolotl because it helps it be able to absorb oxygen from its environment and to also release waste like carbon dioxide out of its body. These are things that all organisms have to be able to do, to bring in things that our bodies need and to release things that our bodies don't need. And when I'm saying our body needs to be able to do this, it is down to the level of every single cell in our body needs to be able to have access to nutrients and to oxygen, and needs to be able to release the waste that would poison it if they weren't able to release it. Every cell in our body needs to be able to do that. So in a unicellular organism, gas exchange can occur directly with the environment. One cell, right through the plasma membrane, things are brought in, things are put out. But animals are multicellular, and for many multicellular organisms, that kind of direct exchange with the environment isn't possible. You have cells deep inside your body that are so far from the environment, it would just take too long for it to be able to get anything in or to release anything. It would die waiting. So we've developed these internal transport and gas exchange systems. One example would be the gills that we just saw, a specialized exchange system in animals that allows oxygen to diffuse from water into the blood vessels, and the carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the water. You kind of have a clue that there may be blood involved in these systems because you can see that their gills are red. So small molecules can move between cells and their surroundings by diffusion, so just straight through the plasma membrane, and that diffusion is really effective for a unicellular organism over small distances, but the larger it gets, the amount of time it takes for something to diffuse is proportional to the square of the distance. So if two things just increase by like 10 micrometers, or you have now gotten 100 times greater in how much time it's going to take, right? So that means it would take you hours or months or years for some cells in your body to be able to do that kind of gas exchange that we need. So we exchange materials with the environment through our circulatory system. Some animals lack a circulatory system. So cnidarians have gastrovascular cavities. Their bodies are only 2 cells thick. They have an outer layer and an inner layer, so their cells are pretty close to in contact with what's inside and outside around their body. This gastrovascular cavity is going to function in digestion, like we just talked about, but it also lets things be able to be absorbed, oxygen and waste release. Flatworms also typically, because they're flat, their body cells are in contact with the environment. That also minimizes that diffusion distance so that they don't typically need to have a circulatory system either. In a circulatory system, we have 3 pieces to make it functional. One is a circulatory fluid. In people, that fluid would be called blood. Interconnecting vessels that are going to carry that fluid around. In people, that would be our veins, our arteries, our capillaries. And then a pump. That would be our heart. The pump is going to push the blood, the fluid, through those vessels. The heart is going to power circulation. It uses its energy to elevate blood pressure, which is pressure that fluid is going to push against the walls. And that allows fluid to move through the blood vessels and then back to the heart. So by circulating, by keeping that fluid moving, the circulatory system is connecting our environment with our respiratory system, with our digestive system, and with our urinary systems. In mammals, we're going to breathe in oxygen, and the blood is going to carry that oxygenated blood to our body tissues. There are both open and closed circulatory systems. In many arthropods, they have an open circulatory system, and you can see here, right, the heart is pumping fluid, and then it's just open here, right? That blood mixes right in with their fluid in their bodies, and then it just kind of gets sucked back in. That's called an open circulatory system. And this fluid is called hemolymph, which is a mix of blood and body fluids that is just covering all of their body cells. The heart is going to create force as it contracts to push that fluid through the vessels and then into sinus spaces. And then as the heart relaxes, the fluid goes right back into the heart. So this is advantageous for a lot of animals because it has lower hydrostatic pressure. So they're going to require less energy to survive. However, it's less efficient to exchange. Okay, so you should be able to tell me how hemolymph is flowing through an open circulatory system and kind of compare it to the flow of water through an outdoor fountain. So think of this as like the pump and the fluid and then flowing into the fountain and then getting pulled right back into the pump. Be able to kind of make that analogy. There's also closed circulatory systems. In a closed circulatory system, you have blood that stays in the vessels and the heart. And this is different from the fluid all around your body cells. It's called interstitial fluid. As long as you're not getting like wounded or something, the blood should be staying within this fluid. It'll allow oxygen to go out, nutrients to go out, carbon dioxide to be brought in. But the blood cells themselves, those red blood cells, are going to stay within that fluid, within those vessels. So here the heart is going to pump blood to larger vessels, your arteries, and then the blood is going to drain to smaller vessels, your capillaries, until it reaches the tissues of all your organs. Chemical exchange occurs right there between interstitial fluid and capillary and tissues, and between interstitial fluid and capillaries. So we're not pulling out of here going to the cells. The blood is releasing its nutrients to the interstitial fluid, which takes it to the cells. And the blood returns back to the heart. So this has higher hydrostatic pressure, so it's going to be more efficient exchange of materials. This is especially important for active animals. We see this in mammals. People have this kind of circulatory system. We see this in birds. We see this in certain types of mollusks, like an octopus, or even in this earthworm. However, the disadvantage is going to be it requires more energy. Oh, here we have it in annelids, cephalopods, and vertebrates that have closed circulatory systems. Humans and other vertebrates have a closed circulatory system that we call the cardiovascular system, and this is our theme for this chapter this week. So the blood circulating to and from the heart is going to take a lot of blood vessels. If you actually took all the blood vessels from a person and lined it up, you could circle the equator twice. So we have a lot of blood vessels in our body. Our main types of blood vessels would be arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So again, that definition does not include any sort of oxygen content, any sort of shape. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Then from arteries, they branch into arterioles, which are these small branches of arteries that will take blood to exchange vessels. These are capillaries. Capillaries are these exchange vessels. They are thin and they are porous, which allows oxygen to leave, nutrients to leave, and carbon dioxide to be brought in. All of these networks of capillaries together are called a capillary bed. These pass closely between our cells, which allows those chemicals to be released into the interstitial fluid. Then these go back to venules, which collect the blood from the capillary and go back into the veins, and veins carry blood back to the heart. So again, this isn't telling you anything about its oxygen concentration. It isn't telling you anything about its shape or its function. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood to the heart. So arteries and veins are distinguished by the direction of blood flow. In our hearts, we could have 2 or more chambers of our hearts, and different types of vertebrates have different numbers of chambers. We can have 2 or 3 or 4 chambers. And how they're separated is going to be different in different types of vertebrates. But within our heart, we have atria that receive the blood that's coming into the heart. Then ventricles that pump the blood out of the heart. So the veins are bringing the blood back to your heart. It goes into the atria, then to the ventricle to be pumped back out. In a lot of fish, sharks, rays, and bony fish, we have a single circulation. So blood makes one single loop here, right? Comes back to the heart and then makes one loop. Blood goes through the body and returns back in one starting point. So it goes from the heart to the gills, to the body, to the heart, to the gills, to the body. They have a two-chambered heart, one atria, the blood comes in, one ventricle contracts and lets the blood go back out. So blood goes to the capillaries where it releases carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen, to the body where it drops off the oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide, back to the heart, to the capillaries where it releases carbon dioxide, picks up oxygen. That's a single circulation. Amphibians and many reptiles have a three-chambered heart. They tend to have one ventricle and two atria. And there's a ridge here that kind of sort of is starting to separate this, but it doesn't actually separate it. These blood, you can see it's kind of colored purple here because the blood is mixing. So that diverts oxygenated blood from the left atrium into the system circuit. This is what is taking blood, oxygenated blood to your body, dropping off oxygen, picking up carbon dioxide. Then it makes a second circuit, the pulmocutaneous circuit, where we are picking up oxygen to take back to the body. I do want to point out here, right and left, this is like you are facing another person, right? If you're facing a person, your right side is on their left and your left side is on their right. So this is a heart that you are facing. The right side is here and the left side is here. So from the right ventricle to the pulmocutaneous circuit to the left atria, left ventricle through the systemic circuit, drops off oxygen through your body. One advantage for a lot of amphibians is that they can shut down this circuit to their lungs when they're underwater, and blood can still flow. They can still have respiration occurring through their skin, so they're still getting oxygen from the water when they're doing that. What advantage do three-chambered hearts have? Three-chambered hearts with incomplete septa have for amphibians and some reptiles. Then double circulation that we see in birds, crocodilians, and mammals, we have four chambers. We have two atria and two ventricles. So we have an atria and a ventricle on our right side, atria, ventricle on our left side. And there's a complete septum dividing this. There's no opening here. Blood is not flowing between them. Separate pulmonary and systemic circuits, and they remain through, they're separated here. So blood can be shunted away from the lungs when you're holding your breath or during fetal development. This is very efficient to supply blood to active endotherms. So blood goes from your lungs through your lung capillaries back into the left atria and left ventricle, where it goes through your systemic circuit, back to your right atria, right ventricle, back to the pulmonary circuit. So in the pulmonary circuit, it is picking up oxygen, releasing waste. Here in the systemic circuit, it is picking up the waste to get out of your body, dropping off the oxygen. One thing I do think is interesting is that birds and mammals have independently evolved this sort of four-chambered heart. So this is a convergent evolution going on here. This isn't, we didn't descend from a common ancestor with a four-chambered heart. We independently developed this through two different evolutionary lines. So this is a very efficient, very evolutionary favored way of having a heart. There are two circuits of blood here with that combine in the pump. In the right side of the heart, you have deoxygenated blood pumped to the capillaries of the lungs. It picks up oxygen, removes carbon dioxide. So in the pulmonary circuit, gas exchange is occurring in the lungs. Then in the left side of the heart, you do the systemic circuit. The oxygenated blood is pumped to your tissues and organs. Blood is going to lose oxygen as the oxygen is going to be delivered to the body. It's going to pick up carbon dioxide, leave the tissues, come back to the heart to complete the circuit. And this coloring the blood blue or red, depending on how much oxygen it has, is just a convention to make it easier for you to kind of see the picture working through. It is not the actual color of blood. Blood is going to be red, whether it is oxygenated or deoxygenated. Okay, the heart of a normally developing human fetus has a hole between the left and right atria. In some cases, this hole does not close completely before birth. If the hole weren't surgically corrected, how would it affect the oxygen content of the blood entering the systemic circuit? 2 of my sisters were born with atrial septal defects, which is this kind of hole in the heart. So this is kind of interesting to me. So I want you to be able to stop and think through this question, because if it's interesting to me, that's something that is going to be tested and quizzed on. So pay attention to this. Think of a good answer to that. And then let's just watch how blood is flowing. This picture is organized a little bit differently from how the picture was in the previous slides. So just pay attention to how they're showing it, because it is, although it's still illustrating the same concept, they've organized their diagram differently.
In mammals, blood pumped by the right side of the heart passes through the lungs and enters the left side of the heart. This is the pulmonary circuit. Blood pumped by the left side of the heart is distributed to the other body organs and returns to the right side of the heart. This is the systemic circuit. This pattern, called double circulation, ensures vigorous blood flow to the organs because the heart pumps the blood a second time after it returns from the lungs.
All right, we are done with this first video. Please come back. We're going to start talking about the anatomy of our heart. Oh, just kidding, one more question. Blood returning to the mammalian heart in a pulmonary vein drains first into the vena cava, left atrium, left ventricle, or right ventricle. When blood is returning in the pulmonary vein, okay, where does it go? Okay, then come back and we will talk about the second section of this chapter, where we are going to go through the anatomy of our heart, our different chambers, our different valves. I'll see you soon. Bye.